Welcome to Talk South Asian to Me. My name is Michelle.
And my name is Anusha.
Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central and hear us react to each other's stories about mental health and growing up in different South Asian households.
And remember, this podcast is not therapy, so engage with what feels entertaining and fun and resonates, and leave the stuff that doesn't.
And this is our very first podcast. So exciting! Woohoo!
Woohoo!
I know we worked so hard to get to this point, and we're so excited to share this with all of you. And I'm so happy that you're all here.
Yay.
So without further ado, let's get started. So like we mentioned in our trailer, our podcast will be dedicated to the topics of in chronological order in the alphabet. So our first letter is A, and the mental health topic that we will be discussing is attachment styles. And specifically, how our attachment styles with our caregivers and or parents influence our attachment styles with our partners or in current adult relationships. So stay tuned to find out if our attachment styles are a constant or can change throughout our life. So before we go and dig into our experiences, let's define attachment and what attachment styles are. So the sources that we use to define this topic were psychologytoday.com and attachment theory, and both use research and articles and literature to back up on what we're going to share. So attachment describes the overall pattern of feeling and behavior we have in a relationship. And this begins in our very early forms of relationship that includes child and caregiver. And there is a parallel and similarity between a child-parent attachment or child-caregiver attachment and the attachments we have in our adult relationships. So we hear the word attachment styles a lot, right? It's a buzzword. So what are the attachment styles? So there are a lot out there, but we're going to talk about four main ones. So the four main attachment styles are secure, anxious, ambivalent, and disorganized. And these attachment styles began to develop during childhood and persist through adulthood. So let's break down the attachment styles. So the first one we're going to talk about is secure attachment. Secure attachment is when the caregiver was attentive and responsive when the child was seeking connection or had needs. In adulthood, secure attachment is displayed through trusting easily and being attuned to one's own emotions. Next, anxious attachment is when a caregiver gives inconsistent care, such as not always responding to the child's needs, leading to the child feeling anxious or unsure about their needs being met. This leads to adults constantly jumping to conclusions, struggling to communicate emotions, and have a fear of rejection. Next is ambivalent attachment, which is when a caregiver is providing inconsistent care also, but it leads to the child feeling indifferent about the caregiver. So anxious attachment is when the child is feeling anxious or unsure about the relationship. And then ambivalent is when the child is feeling just indifferent and starts feeling avoided with the adult or with the caregiver. In adults, this is displayed through randomly pulling away from others and avoiding closeness. Disorganized attachment can be a result of childhood trauma. The primary caregiver also provides inconsistent or no care, and this can lead to adults constantly being unsure of their needs and being inconsistent with their boundaries. Now, it's really easy to remember and think that, oh, once you develop this attachment, are we going to be stuck with this attachment throughout our entire lives? Well, current research is showing that that is not true. Did you know that, Anusha? And it's not true. Yes. Do you know what it's called?
What is it called?
The terminology. It's called earned security. So with professional support, adults can transition to a secure attachment if they had a different type of attachment. So it's called earned security.
Earned security. New word.
Yes. Yes. And I wanted to also us to reflect on that these attachment styles are so abstract, right? Like it's so hard to reflect on this and think about this when you're reflecting on your own experiences. And so I wanted to break down these attachment styles further and explain them using a scenario.
Oh, I like that.
So I'm going to, yeah, you like that? I know. It's
Yeah.
important because it's an abstract topic. So it's really important to give an
Yeah.
example.
It's like reading a
Yeah.
textbook, kind of dry. I need a lesson plan.
Yes. Yes, exactly. The teacher and me like that comment.
Yay! Teach me,
So,
professor.
yes, always. Okay, so secure, anxious, ambivalent, and disorganized. We're going to look at one scenario, and then I'm going to give you the four different styles and how a person can react in that
Mm-hmm.
scenario. So we have two partners, partner A, partner B, who have been dating. And during the day, partner A texted partner B about a date later that evening. However, it's been a couple hours and B has not responded. So that's the scenario. A texted B about a date and B has not responded.
Mm-hmm.
So if A has a secure attachment, how will A respond? So A will think that B is at work and they might be busy. So B will respond once they're free.
Mm-hmm.
If A had an anxious attachment, A may constantly jump to different conclusions that B does not want to go on the date anymore.
Like that overthinking of like, why
Yes.
do they not like
Yes.
me? What's going on? Okay, gotcha.
Exactly. And then ambivalence. So if A has an ambivalent attachment, A might respond by, if they received a response later from B, they might pull away and stop responding, or they might be like low energy or might not respond the same way they usually would.
Kind of like, you don't care.
Yes, exactly. Like you don't care, or like, again,
Yeah.
right? Like being avoidant. And
Mm.
then disorganized, again, remember that's kind of can result from childhood trauma, and it's very inconsistent responses, inconsistent with boundaries. So if A had a disorganized attachment, A might constantly keep texting or constantly keep calling B for a response immediately. But then once B responds, A can pull away too, or maybe not even respond back.
Kind of sounds like that one is a mix of anxious, ambivalent.
Yes. And yeah, exactly. And I feel like it's really important to point this, that this is part of human nature. Like these attachment styles doesn't define a person's character, like doesn't mean a person like is bad, right? Like this is what is a result of the care we received. And like what research is showing now, like you can, with professional work and support, with reflection, with that willingness to change, like if you want to improve your attachment or change it, like it is possible. And it doesn't mean it doesn't mean that you're a bad person, or it's like no one's fault in a way. It's easy to put blame on yourself, or it's easy to put blame on caregivers, but I think it's important, that reflection piece is important, on what can I do to move forward, what can I do to earn my security.
Right. Yeah. And to go off of that too, I mean, attachments are just like these attachments are just a way for us to like understand our general patterns. But at the end of the day, like it's okay, we can one change it, and even if we don't change it, I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with us. We can just be the way we are, and if it works, right?
Yeah,
More
I
often than not,
agree.
probably it's not working all the time. But if it's like sometimes, I mean, that's normal. We don't need to be like diagnosing ourselves as like unhealthy, healthy. It's just the way we have communicated because of what we know. Yeah.
Exactly. And I love that you said that. Like, it's so easy to, when you learn about this, I first learned about this in my psychology class in college. I
Same.
mean, and in late high school, right? And I remember reading about it and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I really hope I'm not anxious, or I really hope I'm not, like immediately, that was like my immediate thought. But it's so important to like give yourself and myself that grace. Like, it's okay, whatever attachment that you had, like that's okay. And, it's okay to work towards earning that security, but it's also okay to not, like you said, if it doesn't change, that's okay too. Like that's just the person you are, and you can change aspects of your attachment, but it's also important to not blame yourself for not being successful in the way you want to change.
Exactly. I know the first time I heard about it, I felt very attacked. I was like, I'm all of these things except for secure.
Right?
But now, no, what were you saying?
No, I was just saying, like, you're right. Like, I remember feeling that exact way.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of like, damn it, why am I all the unhealthy things? But it's fine. You learn, you do, and then you get to a place that works for you. Like right now, I'm probably more secure than before, but I don't think I'm all secure. There are definitely
Mhm.
moments where I'm anxious,
No, I agree
and that's not
100%.
great. But it
That's
works, right?
okay.
It has to work for you.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Did you feel like, I know with your expertise, if you wanted to add anything, one of our
Mm.
listeners for our attachment styles, anything I missed, maybe? Anything you wanted to
Anything
teach
you
me that I don't know
missed?
about?
That is a great comment. And today I am unprepared. I don't
That's
think there's
okay.
anything you haven't really hit on in terms of attachment. I think the biggest thing is that, again, they're just kind of like tools to help us know ourselves better and then reflect on what we would like to do or how we would like to be and then just kind of go from there. But they're definitely not
Yeah.
like life sentences. This is who I am. It's fine. That's it. Whatever. It doesn't have to be like that.
Exactly. Exactly. It doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's like another step of accepting who you are. And
Hmm.
like what you said, it's a tool to know yourself. I love the way you put that. I love
Yeah.
it. I think that's going to stick with me for a lot, like forever. It's like another tool to like know yourself and love yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yes. Okay. So, the way we discuss about structuring our podcast, we are going to define the topic and then go into explaining our own personal experience or reflection relating to that topic. So, we decided that I will go first. And so I'll begin. Are you ready for my experience and story?
I'm so ready for all of these
Okay.
like Mashal nuggets I've never heard of before.
Yes. No, I mean, this was really hard, I will say, to come up
Mhm.
with because I feel that attachment is our whole life.
Mm.
Like I can like it was really hard for me to like pinpoint like one specific like story or one specific example because I feel like
Mm.
the attachment that I am reflecting on that I've experienced growing up and currently it's it's so fluid and it's
Mhm.
so persistent throughout my whole life. Like I feel like every
Yeah.
single interaction I have with my loved ones, my relationships has to do with my attachment. So it's very
Mhm.
challenging me for me personally to find that specific story, but I do have like snippet stories that I feel like will give a good picture of how I am currently reflecting on my attachment
Mm.
styles.
Yay, I can't
So I
wait.
wanted to, yes, I'm excited. So I wanted to first start off in chronological order, right? When I'm young and when
Mm-hmm.
my attachment style was first beginning to develop with my parents. So
Mm-hmm.
I did grow up with both parents in my household
Mm.
and one younger sibling. And we were a middle class family. And when I was at the age of 5, a beautiful human came into my world and that is my sister. I'm very, very
Mm.
grateful for her. I feel very lucky to be her sister. And
Oh.
I know you know that, right?
Very
Um,
adorable relationship.
yes, yes. And I would say that my sister and I are best friends, and I love her
Mm.
dearly. And I will also say that I love my parents, and I'm really, really proud of the way they raised me. But there were some things that I'm going to share that were unfortunate in my case, and it wasn't intentional; it was circumstantial.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to
Mm.
explain that those circumstances a little bit.
Mm.
So, when my sister was born, she was born with a very, very rare chronic illness,
Mm.
and because of that, there was a lot of immediate care that was needed by my parents for my sister, and so a lot of time and energy went towards that
Mm.
naturally.
Mhm.
And that led to my parents unintentionally not spending enough time with me or,
Mm.
not prioritizing my emotional needs.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying that, they did care for me. Like they made sure like, I was cared for, I was
Mm.
loved. But when it came to like when I needed that emotional support or an emotional need, it was sometimes
Mhm.
hard for them to fulfill that. And again,
Mm.
right, it wasn't them doing this intentionally. It was the
Right.
circumstance with my sister's care.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
I feel like sometimes when I still talk about this, it gets really hard for me because
Mm.
there are aspects of this situation that gave me qualities and traits that I'm really proud of. But I think again, it goes back to like my attachment that I created or it developed with for me and how it
Mhm.
persisted. And
Yeah.
so I would say that with my reflection, I believe that it was an anxious attachment that was developed early on because of that, right? And like whenever my sister would have a need, or she got sick, or she needs medicine, or she needs something specific, and maybe if I'm crying or if I need something, it was really natural for them to prioritize her health and her well-being over this, because it's very common, I would say, like I've seen that like in my household, where like physical health is more prioritized than emotional health,
Sure.
emotional well-being. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where it stemmed from. Like my emotional needs were not being really quickly met. And so I feel like the anxious attachment developed. And while I was kind of reading the qualities that the anxious attachment kind of persists in people, the fear of rejection like screamed at me. I was like, oh my gosh, fear of rejection, AKA people pleasing, right?
Oh yeah.
We hear that all the time. And I'm so
yeah.
guilty of it. Like till this day, I can say very
Mm.
confidently. And now I'm working on it. So I call myself a recovering people pleaser,
I like
right?
that.
But I think it stems from an anxious attachment, right? You have that fear of rejection. You're always seeking that approval, like, oh, if I do this right, they're going to stay with me. So
Right.
if I'm
They're gonna
feeling
love me.
happy, if I'm like, if I'm not upset all the time, if I'm not showing my emotions to my parents, if I'm not crying, like they'll be okay. They'll be happy with me, And it was
Yeah.
really hard, when I was writing, like, preparing
Yeah.
this story for today and thinking about that, like, wow, like this people pleaser in me stems so back into my life.
Right.
But it's so true, right? And I feel like that quality carried through me with me throughout my childhood, still lingers in my adulthood, still working on it, but it's there. And I feel like in some ways, especially in today's society, it can get reinforced, right? When you're a people
Oh
pleaser,
yeah.
you're extra good at communication, you're like extra like on top of things, and then you get rewarded like in your career, in your school.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of my thought process when it came to like how my attachment style began. Even in my childhood, in elementary school, middle school, high school, I feel like I was always finding myself overcompensating my time and energy to make sure that I receive my friends' approval and attention. Yeah. And then in college, I also found myself overcompensating my time with my boyfriend at that time. It was sophomore year, and my boyfriend at the time had started dating long distance the year before, and he was transferring into the school I was going to. And so, as a new relationship, we were merging our lives together, right? And figuring out how we're going to balance our time with each other, and then making like our own friends and family. And it was so quick and easy for me to overcompensate my time. And I found myself spending so much more time with my boyfriend at the time than my friends and family. And it was so crazy initially. Like I didn't even realize that right away. Isn't that crazy? Like
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that. And I think it was, hurting some of my relationships. And then it was eye opening. And I was like, oh, I need to like be better about this. I don't like this. I need, there's other important people.
Did you like realize that like insight on your own, or did somebody like, you're not doing this like you used to? Why are did somebody
Yeah.
like kind of create that pathway to figuring that out, or was that kind of like, I haven't seen my friends, like what is going on?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good question. I think it was a little bit of both, but I think it was initiated by other people, which is interesting how much my fear of rejection, my anxious attachment blinded me.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I was constantly making sure that my partner at that time, if I gave him all my time and energy, he's not going to leave me. Like that was like my mindset, because that was my anxious attachment that I had developed. And so it did take some like conversations with friends and family that, hey, like, what are you doing? Like, let's do this. Let's go out for dinner. And I remember like, oh, we haven't done this in like months, like, let's do this. And I think it was a little bit of both, but it was definitely initiated by other people.
The therapist brain part of me, I had like thought of like, I wonder if the reason that it was maybe, I don't know if it was easy, but like maybe easier to be like, okay, yeah, maybe I shouldn't do that as much with just my partner. I should do that with my friends too. I wonder if a part of you found it a little easier to do that and like focus on that truth because
Mhm.
maybe like you also want to people please like friends. I mean, they've been around for a while, you love them. So it's like people pleasing both sides. How do I balance this? But it's a very normal thing that we do as like people. When we get into relationships, sometimes we do have to like readjust our time
Yes,
for ourselves,
exactly.
for job, school, parents, friends, and a new partner. Oh my gosh, it's a lot for anybody.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think you were spot on. Like, you're right. I think the people pleaser in me was being activated on all aspects of my life, like friends, family. And it was true. Like, I'm sure at that time, like it was my survival mode slash like my people pleaser mode where I was like, oh yeah, I need to change things. But like now
Mhm.
reflecting back, I think it stems back to like, oh, this was a people pleaser in me too on the other side. And you make a
Mhm.
really good point on that. Um and so, once I realized I made that realization, I was like, okay, let me start spending, more time with my friends and
Mhm.
family. This is not okay. I need to balance. And I can say, like, it took years for me to reflect and, attend regular therapy to really look
Yeah.
and reflect, look back and see, like, okay, where did this all root from? Where did this stem from? And it
Mhm.
goes back to that anxious attachment. And now I can say that people pleaser mode has simmered down a little bit. I can say that confidently today. Thanks to my therapist and all my supporters and my loved ones,
Mhm.
for helping me feel more secure in my relationships. And I'm so excited to continue working toward that secure attachment, towards that goal of like feeling more secure. But I think just being able to talk about it like this is a huge win for me. I feel like if Michelle, like 5, 10 years ago, would be asked to talk about this, I feel like I would not be nowhere. I would be nowhere near where I am today. And I
Right.
really, really credit the self work and the therapy that I've been doing. And
Mhm.
and not to say it was easy to even start that, right? Like it was a big
Yeah.
step for me. I was talking myself to do therapy for years before I actually took that first step.
Yeah.
But I'm so grateful. So that was
Yeah.
my story.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I know. I mean, just like knowing how even like you were in high school when I met you to like now, I mean, difference, right? Because I even remember back in high school, you would feel a lot. And like you would, feel really bad or like guilty for like not being able to do something or like not being able to follow through on something versus now, I mean, you might still feel bad probably, right? That's the caring
Mhm.
person in all of us. But you're like, I love you. I'm
Exactly.
sorry, but I can't do it. I hope you get it. At least
You're
you
right.
have that boundary. And I think it's just so important. It's so needed.
Thank you. That means a
You're
lot. I
doing
appreciate it.
great.
Thank you.
Cheering for you.
Woo.
Woo. Interesting. Okay. Well, you want to hear about my story on attachment?
Of course, I'm ready.
So, my story on attachment. Okay. I have kind of these like phases, and I'll talk about it in phases. I've got three parts. The
Okay.
first part is like childhood. Second part is what I call my establishing independence.
Okay.
Basically, that was college where things fell apart and also came together. Um, and then the third part is, I guess, more so now. So
Okay.
when I was a kid, we had kind of like a, a very typical immigrant story situation, kind of came with not a lot and then kind of built our way, up. And so at that time, when I was really young, I had come with, well, my parents had come here first, and then I came, and then I went back, and then I came. It was kind of a mess of traveling. And so at that
Mhm.
time, I was fortunate though to have a lot of like very loving relationships and like caring family, not just my parents, but my grandparents, my aunt and uncle. Well, at the time, my aunt and then my uncle. So I it was like in no shortage for that love, and I didn't often feel like I didn't have secure people in my life. If I needed something, there were always people there. But in the very beginning, my parents weren't always there. Not because I didn't want to be or they, it was more so they were trying to get life established here while I was there. So I still remember to this day a story that they tell. Um, in the very beginning, we were living with another family member, and my dad was traveling for work. And I guess I was so young, I didn't really have the concept of where is my dad? Where is he going? When is he coming? It was just confusing. So they love to tell this story about a one time when my dad came home and like picked me up, and I like ran crying and snotting to my dad. He picked me up, and then I also simultaneously started hitting him and being like, I don't know,
Oh,
yelling at him or something.
yeah. That's
So it's
hard.
kind of, it
Yeah.
is hard, yeah, because I guess like at that tiny little brain, I was like, is he coming? Is he going? Why is he doing it? Like, you
Mm-hmm.
don't have any concept of
Yeah.
understanding that. So I feel
Yes.
like at that time, I was kind of like all over the place, anxious, avoidant, and
Mm-hmm.
disorganized, probably. It was just a mess,
How
you know?
old were you at that time?
I was really,
Like if you had to
really young. I think
guess.
about 3, 4.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think
I can
around
only
2 to
imagine.
4.
And you're
Too
right,
teasing.
like you probably didn't have that concept, right? Like, where
Yeah.
is he? Probably didn't understand why he had to leave. All
Yeah.
you probably cared about was like, where's my dad? He's my caregiver.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's not like I particularly noticed, because again, 2 to 4 years, the
Hmm.
concept of like it's here and then it's not, where to go, you know?
Hmm.
So it's not like I
Exactly.
really noticed anything missing. Like I had a lot of loving family members. But then seeing him and then being like, "Oh yeah, wait, you're my dad. Where were you?"
Yeah.
Just that shock is just very different,
Yes. And
but
like attachment
immigrant style.
style, like is primary caregiver. So it's almost as if
Exactly.
maybe like your dad was your primary caregiver,
Mhm. Yeah,
right?
exactly, exactly. And even with like mom, but mom was a bit more constant for a while, and then that flipped, of course. I was with dad more often, then mom was further away, like
Okay.
states away. Growing up, though, I did spend a couple of years here and there, a couple of months, I guess, more accurately, without one parent or the other. And that was very difficult. But
Mm.
again, it's not anything they could have done anything differently. It's situational,
Yeah,
immigrant experience, right? You go where you can find work. Sometimes it's not together.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it can separate the family.
Exactly. So then, kind of the next phase of all of this is just kind of generally growing up. So I'm talking like middle school, high school years. I saw a lot of anxious and like avoidant relationships in the people around me. And again, like I said, I'm fortunate to grow up with like a lot of family. So I'm not talking about like just parents, but I'm talking about aunts and uncles. I'm talking about like grandparents, relatives. I got to see like a lot of different relationships play out, and most of them, if not all of them, were either anxious or avoidant, especially
Mhm.
when it came to having important conversations or difficult conversations, arguments, things like that. So I felt like my programming from the get-go, that's what I knew. That was my template for how you handle arguments or fights in relationships. Um,
I mean, that's all you were taught,
Yeah, that's all I can
right?
see. That's all that's modeled
Yeah.
because that's all they knew too. It's not like they knew
Mm-hmm.
better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, then to add to that, of course, there's like movies, Bollywood movies, Hollywood movies, and like the way that they talk about, relationships and like love, and it's very like epic love stories.
Mm-hmm.
Like the girl is chased. And then you gotta go a little back and forth, and then you gotta
Yeah.
pout, you gotta all of these like like messaging out there about like what it's supposed to look like and how it's supposed to feel. Just a lot of chaos of messages out there.
Lots of
So
chaos.
I know, yeah, exactly, and it's hard to really know or see real examples of like secure attachment. And like I can't think of one growing up that I've
Mm-hmm.
seen that anywhere. It's kind of sad.
It
And
almost
then
makes me wonder. It almost makes me wonder, like, right,
mhm,
like what you mentioned, like that's all you knew. It's like very
mhm,
much so intergenerational. Like it goes
I
back.
know. Yeah,
And it's like,
absolutely.
like you were born into this, like almost,
Exactly.
right? Same with me,
Yeah.
right? Like it's like almost if they didn't know how to share a
Mhm.
secure attachment with a child.
Mhm. Exactly. And of course, like you said, right, they didn't know how to share it with their child. And it is intergenerational. They didn't receive that. their parents didn't receive that. Their parents
Exactly.
probably didn't receive that. It's no one's fault. It's just things just happen, and then they just get passed down because nobody, had the time, the resources, or the know-how to reflect and be like,
Exactly.
is this how it has to be, can it look different? You're kind of in a survival mode most of the time back then.
Mhm.
You don't really have what I think is a privilege that we have, to take a breath. Privilege, or perhaps a necessity at this point, to
Mhm.
stop and like actually reflect, because it's hard to keep
But
that
it is a
going.
privilege, right? Because what we talked about, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you have to meet your physical
It's true.
needs before you meet your emotional. And I feel like, our ancestors were probably back home worrying to meet those physical needs. Like
Yeah,
emotional needs was way higher in the hierarchy.
absolutely. Yeah. And even if they did have possibly the time to figure that out or even know that, it's not like it was a concept that was well
Mhm.
encouraged. If anything, it was probably
Exactly.
discouraged. Yeah.
Exactly.
So by the time Anusha came to college, she had all of these wonderful ideas. And at that time, um, I started dating, and I was kind of figuring out like what I wanted to do for my major, and like trying to align with what was right for me versus what I had set my whole life up to being, which was, of course, a doctor. That didn't happen. Quite quickly, I was like, nope, not for me.
Me too, girl. Me
And
too.
I know, right? What a brown story. I was going to be a doctor. So between this like career confusion, which was almost like an identity crisis, because that's how I set my whole student career up to being a doctor, preparing for that. This whole identity crisis was happening. Super stressed about it, what it meant to me, communicating that to my parents, who've always saw that for me, and
Mhm.
having just started a relationship with somebody. It was just like so much confusion and crisis and stress that at a certain point, I didn't even quite realize it, but I had, I forget the term for it. It's like stress induced or stress triggered. Uh, I don't know. But basically, the idea is that your stress, if you get to a significant level of some kind of stress, you trigger some expression of your like genes, and you
Oh,
kind of switch something to happen.
yes.
I forget the exact terms for it now, but
It's like
basically
nature versus
all
nurture. Nature, like, how like environment can trigger, like, they
yeah,
interact. I know what you're talking about.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like some stress can trigger the thing that was always in your genes but didn't necessarily need to come out. Basically
Mm-hmm.
that's what happened. I was so stressed out that my I was like diagnosed with hypothyroidism, but I was so, one, in denial, and two, stressed out that I had all, like literally when I say all, I mean all the symptoms of hypothyroidism. Like I've had the depression, I've had the great like immense amount of weight gain, the intolerance to cold, and like the cravings were weird, the mood swings, I had
Mm-hmm.
anxiety attacks, panic attacks. I had literally every symptom under the sun, and I did not know what was going on until literally I could not walk one or two steps in front of me without like
Oh,
utter pain, because I had that much retention in my calves. And even then I was being stubborn. I was like, nothing's wrong. I'm sure it's fine. Maybe I'm just tired, because it was finals week and I was staying up. And my friend was
mm-hmm.
like, screw this noise. You're going to go see a doctor. You're not listening to anybody. I'm calling your parents up. It was that stressful for me at that time. And it was a lot of those things, right? The identity, but also the relationship aspects. I mean, I thought that relationships were supposed to look a certain way, that they do in
Mm-hmm.
movies, that they do in the relationships I see. And they can look like that, but they're not really often very helpful if they look like that. If you get into an argument, shutting down, not talking about what's bothering you, not sharing that, not communicating clearly what you need, what you want, how you feel, and then walking away from the conversation because you're just so overstimulated. Those things are quote unquote normal in the sense that they happen, and like it makes sense why they happen, but they're not helpful.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what I did for like weeks, months, until eventually like I just totally broke down with, again, like the identity crisis, with the career, the relationship stress, and the health thing. And so that was actually the first time that I sought out therapy. And then I just started talking about things, and I started being able to like really process what was happening. Um, and it wasn't until I started therapy that I was able to understand, just because the things that we know from our childhood, things that we know to be true, things that we've seen modeled, just because we've experienced it and we know that like our parents or our family members or people that we care about, that we sometimes put on a pedestal, do certain things, doesn't always mean that they're correct things or helpful things or the best way to do things. It's just things that were done. Might have worked for them, might have not worked for them. They're still amazing people, but it doesn't mean it's right for you. And it wasn't until therapy that I was really able to like voice like, oh yeah, like I do put my parents on a pedestal because I love them and I see them as amazing people, but also they're humans. And humans are known to be making mistakes. They're not always right.
Wow.
And it wasn't
That's a
until that
huge realization.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
definitely transformative for me to be able to recognize it, but also admit it to myself. That was a lot.
Wow.
But
So
once I
what
did,
what made
mhm,
you make that realization? Like, was it some specific scenario? Like you said, there was a lot happening all
mm,
at once. But was
yeah,
there like a specific situation or built up of something that made that
mm,
kind of trigger for you?
yeah, it was really just going to therapy. And then
Okay.
in therapy, like my therapist had a really wonderful way of like just asking. She would just like ask questions and I would just go off on like a monologue. And a lot
That's
of the
me.
times, I know, right? There's just like so much pent up that needs to get out.
Mhm.
But she would ask me these questions of like, why do you feel that way? Or like, where does that really come from? Or what comes up for you when we talk about these things? And all of the answers to that were something to do with parents. Because again, like I said, right? I mean, that's
Mm,
just our origin story. You know, that's what
exactly.
we knew. And it's, again, not anything bad on parents, but we have to get a model somewhere. And
You're right.
realizing that idea of like, hey, we can love our parents and also recognize maybe not everything they are about and preach might necessarily be for us. I think that's so
Mhm.
important.
Wow, I'm
Yeah.
so proud of you. Like,
Thanks.
way to be so open-minded to that idea in the first place, right? Like when
It
you
was
were
hard.
making those
I fought
reflections
it.
in therapy. I can't
Hmm.
only imagine, right? Like you're right. Like I am also feel like growing up, I put my parents on a pedestal too, and I had to go through that journey. Like I
Yeah,
can relate with that. It was hard,
exactly.
but I just can't imagine, right? Like going through
Mm.
all of that and then having that realization, like that
It
your
was a
world
lot.
around you is not always right.
Yeah.
Like the
It's
people that you look up to.
kind of a foundational thing. At least it was for me. I imagine it might be for other people, right? It was kind of like the glue that held everything together. When in doubt, look to your parents. When in doubt, ask your parents. And then suddenly be like, oh, wait, maybe they don't have it all figured out. Maybe they don't know the blueprint for my life. That's kind of like earth shattering, but also really freeing once you can kind of go through that process of like, okay, then I can turn to myself and I can make mistakes and I can make my own mistakes separate from their mistakes. It was like a whole process. But once I was able to do that, I was much better at learning to like be uncomfortable and like quell my people pleasing tendencies and not wanting to like rock the boat as I share my thoughts or share my
Mm-hmm.
needs or wants with a partner, and just be like, hey, this is what I think actually, you know? And
Okay.
doing that has really helped long term sustainability of a relationship too. Just because when you do that and you feel heard, or at least you advocate for yourself, you're being true to yourself, you're being authentic. So you're likely to last in a relationship. But if you don't do that, a relationship isn't going to always necessarily last, right? Because eventually we have a
Exactly.
tendency to, like, you know, pick on each other's wounds until
Mm-hmm.
something just kind of snaps.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
You're like shocked.
No, like, well, no, I appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing your story, because like, even for me, it was difficult, to
Yeah.
like, thank you for doing that, and thank you for sharing your story. Like,
Yeah. Did you learn anything
and
you didn't know?
I did. Well, I did. I didn't. I mean, I remember learning about your diagnosis, but I didn't know the extent of it and the symptoms
Yeah.
and the journey you had gone through with it. And, I did not know about that. And so I appreciate you sharing and being vulnerable and being
Yeah.
open to sharing that experience. And like you said, all these reflections and work that we have done, I've done, I feel like in my therapy sessions too, it is earth shattering. I agree with you. And like in our culture, like family is such a big value, like family life and putting family in the pedestal, right? Elders are always right. Like all of those ideas was also very drilled into my head. And
Yeah.
when doing this work and making those realizations, like, oh wait, they're not always right.
Yeah.
Based on what I'm learning, is earth shattering.
Oh yeah. Really changes, again, like talking about the idea of like identity crisis. It's
Yeah.
kind of a different form of identity crisis, because that's how we truly, like, that's our blueprint for the way that we engage with our parents. And then suddenly being like, oh wait, not exactly. It's like we have to rewrite the way that we see our interactions, the way we see them.
Yeah.
But hopefully, if they're willing to receive the change,
Yes.
it can lead to having a different, possibly better relationship with parents too.
I like the word analogy you use, blueprint, right? You
Mm-hmm.
born with this blueprint, you have this blueprint attachment style,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can work on redesigning it, like you said, redoing it,
Yeah.
redesigning it. I love it.
In therapy, what I often say is, like, it's like our programming. This is the way
Yes.
we're coded, but we can recode it, reprogram it.
Yes, reset, hard reset. Right?
Well, that scares people when I say hard reset. I tried that once, and they're
No,
like,
I'm just joking.
no.
Not hard reset. I think reprogram,
Just
like you
tweaking.
said.
Tweaking.
Tweaking, reprogramming, recoding,
Exactly.
or changing the code, like you said. I 100% agree.
Exactly.
I
It's like
love that.
keep the things that work and then change or throw out the ones that don't.
I love that. It's so
Yeah.
wonderful. Wow. I can't,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so excited that we've reached towards the end of our first podcast. Oh
I
my
know.
gosh. I know. So before ending, we wanted to make sure that we take some time towards our end of our episode to, make sure our audience knows that we're here, and we would love to hear from you. So if this topic resonated with you, feel free to, share your story with us through email or use our socials. But we really appreciate you being here and listening to our stories. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And
Any last
quick
words,
shout out
Alicia?
to those
Yes.
socials. It is
Yes.
at Talk South Asian to me on any and all
yes.
platforms. So that
Yes.
is platform for Instagram, for TikTok, for, I think we have Twitter too, right?
Yes, and Facebook.
Twitter.
And
And
then
Facebook,
our
right.
handles, our bios have our email address if you feel like email is a safer place to share your story or, give us feedback.
Yeah. But if you want it here too, everything is it's Talk South Asian to me at gmail.com and handles at Talk South Asian to me. Easy to remember.
Yes. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being a part of our first podcast.
Woohoo! All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.